I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. At least that's the phrase I've been hearing lately. Popularized by filmmaker Ava DuVernay and writer Brianne James, the idea of being part of centuries past family members' dreams, of somehow being a goal of theirs, has been on timelines, movies, friends' lips, and on my mind. Sometimes I frequently cringe at the idea of being any of their wildest dreams, especially when I imagine them watching me at my messiest points in life. But lately, I've been considering the weight of that phrase. It has to go beyond them being proud of me for a list of hashtag Black Excellence accomplishments. What does it mean to be a reflection of one's ancestors? It's helpful to first decenter myself, as weird as that sounds in the context of my previous question. Maybe, as sociologist Eve Ewing writes, my ancestors' dreams did not involve me. What if, she continues, they dreamed of living in space or the ocean? What if they dreamed of laying in the grass and looking at the clouds for hours? Or more realistically, what if my Yoruba ancestors' wildest dreams was simply to survive? One way to define colonization is by what Mills calls a mission of conquests, the European expansion at the expense of other worlds. Another way to define colonization is the ideology that brought white Europeans into my family's homes to enact various forms of physical, sexual, and spiritual violence 500 years ago. What's worse is they used bringing the gospel of Christ as an excuse for greed. Pure pursuit of ownership was masked as pursuit of salvation, and white violence was masked as mission trips. Because these colonizers felt owed to land and superiority, they not only came in and stole people and resources, but they came in and forced my ancestors, my family, to either submit to Christianity, go into hiding, or die. I think about this often, especially when I think about so many things that some Nigerians deem as white nonsense or devil worship that's actually embedded in our culture. I think about the indigenous spiritual practices my ancestors perfected that were declared invalid. I think about, as the Black Youth Project theorized, how queerphobia is not stitched into the fabric of our history, but instead is potentially attached to heteronormative ideas brought over by Christian colonizers. I think about the erasure of tribal lands, the British clumsy creation of borders, and the subsequent Nigerian civil war that followed 400 years later than this. How did colonization hinder my ancestors' ability to live and survive? How many ancestors were taken too soon because of the constant violence at the hands of those claiming to be Christians? I recognize that, in some ways, that this is unfair. I recognize this use of Christianity might not really be Christianity, but instead white supremacy, or what Hooks calls the centering of whiteness and white people, masquerading as Christianity. The self-absorbed mindset that whiteness equals superiority, equals justification for colonization, might not be connected to a loving Lord and Savior. But Christianity, both in America and Nigeria, is so intertwined with the history of violence that I heavily struggle to untangle the two. This is the reason why I haven't brought myself to go regularly to a Christian church in 5 years. This is the reason why I want to spend time researching about Orishas and reconcile my knowledge of Christianity with my pull towards Yoruba religion. This is the reason why, when Mom says that we should be grateful missionaries brought the word of God to Nigeria, it feels like a slap in the face to so many who have struggled before us. So, I forgive my ancestors if I was not part of their wildest dreams. I forgive them if they instead use their energy to keep their space, their religions, and their way of life together. If they did have the space and vision to think of me, though, I wonder if it was my ancestors' wildest dreams for my parents to make the conscious choice to move to Naperville, Illinois. Actually, I know the answer to this. It's not. To be clear, it's not the act of moving to the United States, per se, that I believe is the opposite of their dreams. After the Nigerian Civil War in the 60s, the lack of educational and occupational choices created a brain drain, or the emigration of thousands of Nigerian immigrants and professionals to countries such as the United States. My parents' choice to leave everyone they loved so they could create different and somewhat better opportunities for their children was a reality, and it's a choice that I am forever grateful for them for making. However, the idea of moving to Naperville was certainly not part of our ancestors' grand imagination for us. I am, as Oku states, a child of voluntary immigrants, a category that is not based solely on race, but on the history of my Nigerian ancestors and how they were brought to the United States. Thus, I and my family must wrestle with the fact that this is not our land. But also, Naperville, Illinois is the very definition of white flight, the act of, as Coates directly writes, white people fleeing their neighborhoods after failing to terrorize Black folks out of their homes. To move to a town that was created in response to white people's fear of violence in Chicago, read fear of Blackness, to move to this town because, as my father told us later, the schools were better and it wasn't as dangerous as Chicago, was definitely not what I think my ancestors wanted for us. In fact, this thinking is more aligned with what Collins and Jung call the white architect of the mind, or submitting to the dominant idea that whiteness is superior, the system of whiteness is normal and unquestionable. Plainly put, my parents, and later my brother and I, were enchanted by whiteness. My parents believed, as Graham detailed in White Privilege, that our economic privilege could erase the racism we would face in a white suburb, and they wanted to benefit for the system, even if it went against their history. Of course, our economic status did give us privilege, not only to access Naperville and Naperville's well-regarded school system, but with, as Dumas draws upon in his Marxian critique of critical race theory, the power to thrive in a capitalistic forward society, much more so than other Black folks in different classes. But my parents confused economic power with being able to buy whiteness, and they bought into the idea of what Harris called whiteness as property. They believed whiteness was owed the best schools, the best opportunities, and the best home ownership. They saw the power of whiteness and thought, as many Nigerian immigrants do, that instead of interrogating why whiteness should be something to strive towards, we should submit and assimilate as a way of survival. So we tried doing the white folks in devaluing and minimizing Blackness, ignoring the harm that this caused on our Black peers, our Black cousins in Nigeria, and even on our Black selves. This led to some strong internalized anti-Blackness that my family had to and still has to unpack. Only after about thinking about shared ancestors separated through the African diaspora, only after freeing my mind through Black feminist theorists and Black feminist communities, only after understanding that I was trying to justify the very systems that does try to still to this day destroy my heritage, did I learn to decenter whiteness in my life. Decentering whiteness also meant examining my family's journey to Naperville with a more critical lens and struggling with the idea of moving to another country without a deep acknowledgement of whose land you move on and can afford to move on. It took me almost 25 years to understand, from my grand understanding of Europeans coming to my ancestors' lands, that we are settlers on indigenous land. Now, to be clear, there's often a very problematic discussion of colonizing indigenous lands and ignoring the realities of Black descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. My parents to move here, while not easy, flippant, or unavoidable, is different than that. To suggest that these ancestors are simply immigrants instead of understanding and acknowledging their lack of agency of living their homelands is insulting and, quite frankly, anti-Black. To also be clear, my ancestors are not the one who used manifest destiny, or what tribal creator McKinley Joyce Bravery describes as the excuse of God's destiny to take over lands through whatever means necessary. That is not my burden. What is my burden, however, is to remember that my family themselves are settlers on the land of the Peoria tribe in Illinois, and I'm currently a settler on the lands of Puyallup, Nisqually, Steilacoom, and Squaxin Island Native peoples. Finally, in all my wrestling and unpacking and imagining and musing, I wonder if I'm enacting any of my ancestors' wildest dreams as I navigate existing in my Black femme body. When Coates asks in his letter to his son, what did I mean specifically by loss of my body? I understood that deeply, as every day is a struggle to claim my skin, my personhood, away from the idea of white patriarchal ownership. However, while Coates refers to Black male bodies, I naturally refer to my own Black female body. The term intersectionality is more than just a buzzword for me, but a theory created by Crenshaw that perfectly describes my life. I am the living embodiment of sitting in intersections of race, gender, or sexuality, or more specifically, getting hit at the crossroads of racism, sexism, and heteronormativity. One of the many reasons I am so obsessed with studying and eradicating sexual violence with any kind of violence actually, is because I am so obsessed with the idea of agency of one's body, specifically because I'm a Black woman. The idea that my body is not my own comes from so many avenues, and I often struggle to maintain and gain control. Many days, my body is seen as both a threat and an object. My body is, as Brown writes, a stand-in for another Black female body or the worst stereotypes. It's a projection and an afterthought. My personhood is, as Melissa Harris Perry theorized, often politicized within the system of whiteness without me getting much political power or respect and citizenship in America. I am, to directly quote Claudia Rankine, most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background. And in my work environment that values whiteness, in my school systems that value whiteness, in my interactions with those who value whiteness, in a country built on the backs of Black people, in the name of upholding whiteness, even when I'm not conscious, in my own fucking architect of the mind, when I'm valuing whiteness, I am thrown against a sharp white background. A lot. But I'm here. I exist. Sometimes even I thrive. As Brown says in her chapter, Why I Love Being a Black Girl, I love being a Black girl. Even though we often work and exist in white spaces, it's important to remember the joy in being a Black woman. There is joy in existing in, to be precise, my Black, queer, feminized body. There's joy in building community with other Black women in, as Davis says, learning to live as we climb. There is joy in Black girl magic, in circling each other with love and celebration as we envision our futures. And there's joy in Sankofa, which in Ghana Tui language reminds us that it is not wrong to go back to what you have forgotten. There is joy in going back, and through the theories and existing, remembering who I am. And maybe this is my ancestors' ultimate vision, for their descendants to authentically exist, to honor previous legacies, and to live freely within their bodies.